Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. Who marries who is the ultimate decision in the British monarchy, leading to decades of controversy, secrets and rebellion. The Royal Marriages Act was put into place in 1772 when King George III became frustrated at his family marrying the commoners. And this led to a royal crisis in 1936 when King Edward VIII abdicated the throne to marry an American socialite. And so this changed the lineage of the British royal family. And one little princess who was affected by this was the naughty little sister of Queen Elizabeth II. It's Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret Rose was the second daughter of popular monarchs King Edward VI and Queen Elizabeth I. She was described as having a will of iron and was fittingly born during a storm. And she was placed fourth in line to the throne at her birth, but when her father became king, she was propelled to second in line to the throne. And at just 6 years old, they moved to the very grand estate of Buckingham Palace, which Margaret describes as a cosy family home. As the children of the king and emperor of many nations, the princesses were treated very regally. They were dressed exquisitely in fine clothing and paraded for the British public. They were always curtsied to and addressed by their formal royal titles. Princess Margaret enjoyed swimming and running around outside, but she was known to be a wild and naughty child, and so her older sister Elizabeth had to learn to correct her. And there was 5 years difference between Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret, but they were always close until Margaret started to notice some differences in how they were being raised, because Queen Elizabeth II was to be the future monarch, so she was educated by the best tutors from Eton and private schools in constitutional history and academics. Whereas Margaret was not really encouraged academically, she learned from a French governess etiquette and how to play the piano. The children became trapped inside Windsor Castle during the 5 years that there was occupation of Europe by Germany. They had trenches dug around them and barbed wire, so there was nowhere for them to go. Following years of isolation, an adolescent, Princess Margaret now became involved in her first forbidden love affair, and this happened on a family vacation in 1947. Peter Townsend was a war hero. He was a pilot in the Battle of Britain and very well respected, and he became the courtier to the king, his right-hand man who was in charge of his schedule. And so the pair spent a lot of time together, and despite him being married with children and much older, they actually became entangled in a secret relationship, which the king would have certainly disapproved of. Sadly, in 1952, the king died, and this left his family and the British Empire very grief-stricken, and Queen Elizabeth II was called to reign. And it was during the televised coronation that the British press started to notice that there was an affair going on between Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend. And there was a social change in Britain about the way that the royals' private lives were portrayed in the media, because they had opened themselves up to be on television, and so they had opened themselves up to be criticised. The Queen's team were fiercely protective of her reputation and of her position as the head of the British Church. And so Peter Townsend was exiled to Brussels to work there, until the scandal had died down. However, in 1955, Princess Margaret actually came out and said that she would not marry Peter Townsend, despite the rules actually being changed for the royal family in Parliament. And this was because she wanted to uphold her duties. And this saw a change in the way that the public viewed marriage because they were influenced by what was going on in the royal family. So marriage had been seen as kind of half pragmatism and half love, but now there was a feeling that it had moved more towards being about a love match. Princess Margaret was a notably stylish royal, with her interests being very creative. She liked fashion and ballet and the arts, which was very different from the royals of the time who liked outdoor pursuits and hunting and fishing. And so she went on a very well publicised tour of Paris and visited Christian Dior, where she became the muse for his new look because she had a tiny waist and ample assets, and she looked just perfect in the Dior clothing. And so she started to be photographed by some of the world's best photographers, such as Cecil Beaton, and became a fashion icon. And this was very, very difficult and troubling for the royal family, who hadn't had this kind of attention before. And the papers really went to town with it. And they started reporting scandalous rumours about the princess because she was very liberated and liked the modern music scene. The royals tried to encourage Princess Margaret to attend the high society balls and to find a man of good standing from the aristocracy. However, Margaret was very different and she wanted something a bit more creative. Attending a wedding, she met Antony Armstrong Jones, who was also known as Tony Snapshot and was a famous photographer. And he worked for the Daily Express, where he was known to be very wild and a womanizer. He took photos of Princess Margaret and she fell in love with his very engaging personality. It was nearly the swinging 60s and people became very liberated and wanted to have a good time. And Armstrong Jones was very, very much part of this scene. He was very avant-garde. And this kind of lifestyle just excited Margaret and she wanted part of it. And so she started meeting up with him secretly, having rides on his motorcycle, and she could just hide and disguise herself under the motorcycle helmet. On the 26th of February 1960, the couple made a shock announcement of their engagement, which took the royal household by surprise. But they did accept the pairing. They liked Antony Armstrong Jones because he was very pleasant, he was very charming, and they knew that Margaret loved him. And so they went on to have the very first royal wedding that was televised, and it gained 20 million viewers because there was now an increased public interest in the lives of the royals. There were big political and social changes during the 60s, and it opened up the media, and people were now watching different things on TV, and there were releases of raunchy novels like Lady Chatterley's Lover. And Margaret herself was very engrossed in this new and progressive scene, and she really enjoyed how liberated and easy and free the lifestyle was. And so she would do a lot of things that royals had never done before. And she would meet a lot of people that royals had never met before because Tony, he was very involved in show business. And this started to merge the celebrity with the royal family. However, Princess Margaret never shook off royal protocol. And even Tony, who was now known as Lord Snowdon, had to address her formally. They had to curtsy in her presence, and nobody could eat before her, nobody could talk before her, and nobody could even sit down before her. So Tony must have found this very paralysing. Lord Snowdon carried on his very wild lifestyle in secret. having many affairs and hanging in circles where there was drug use, partying. They were open and liberated and very 60s minded. And Margaret perhaps didn't realise how bohemian that Tony actually was. And it was revealed by DNA much later that he had fathered a child with his best friend's wife. In 1967, rumours began to circulate about the rift in the marriage, as Lord Snowdon stopped attending the royal engagements and Margaret went unaccompanied to the Caribbean island of Mustique. And this was where aristocrats had made a purpose-built English estate on this island, and it was run by the locals, and it became a secret hideaway for the rich and the famous and the playboys and rock stars. The islanders were very determined to keep the island an exclusive place to visit, and so they took great measures to avoid press invasion, such as guarding the airports for photographers and journalists. However, the journalists were very, very determined, and they would pay off holidaymakers and hide in boats in the sea to get their shots. In 1976, Princess Margaret was discovered to have had a younger lover. And despite Lord Snowdon also having started a new and secret relationship, it was actually Princess Margaret who was blamed for the ending of the marriage. On the 10th of May 1978, the marriage between Princess Margaret and the Earl of Snowdon was dissolved in a divorce. And this also followed a trend for divorces to rise in Britain and the streamlining of the divorce courts and how things were processed and settled. The 70s brought really hard times for the British public, who faced job losses and unemployment, and they started to turn against the monarchy because they could see royals like Princess Margaret who weren't really doing their duty. Instead, she was on a Caribbean island spending lots of money with her younger lover. And so a resentment started growing, and this really worried the palace because they wanted to continue the tradition of the monarchy, and now they were facing questions about how it was funded. And in a complete turnaround of character, Princess Margaret became staunchly traditional, and she reverted back to her original aristocratic circle because she realised that the individual is not more important than the institution. And so she became very cross when the younger royals, like the Queen's children and Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson, became involved in scandals. And she really hated the celebritisation of the royal family and the way they were talked about in gossip magazines. Sadly, in 1998, Princess Margaret was found very badly burnt because she had had a stroke in her bathtub, and this left her health deteriorating to the point where she became paralysed and wheelchair bound until passing away on the 9th of February 2002 at 71 years old. Princess Margaret was a thoroughly modern princess who made iconic changes in the ways the royals were seen in fashion, socially, and through the media. She let us see the flesh and the blood behind the jewellery and capes and thrones, and she gave the young royals the chance to actually make some of their own decisions. So let's just hope they start making good ones.